Imagine for a moment I tell you that the world once held beings whose footsteps shook the valleys and whose names were whispered with fear and fascination in every tent and court. Imagine the sky itself seeming to lean closer to earth, as if eavesdropping on a secret it was not meant to hear. The wind carried the metallic taste of armor, the smoke of open fires, the scent of crushed juniper and incense. And children clutched their mothers' skirts while elders spoke of giants. From Adam to your own ancestor, humans thought a certain order held: birth, toil, death. And yet there came a rupture, a forbidden story written in the margins that altered humanity's destiny. This story is the Nephilim, the sons of angels, and it dares to ask, what happens when heaven crosses the line into our world? If you believe that God still intervenes in history in ways that startle the comfortable, write in the comments simply, "I believe." Stay with me. What we will uncover is a trace of judgment and mercy, a pattern of names and choices, and a warning that still hums beneath our feet. The Bible does not merely list names like a roll call. When names are stitched together across generations, they form sentences and sometimes a prophecy. Consider the brief, strange verses that frame the age of the Nephilim in Genesis. Genesis 6:1-4 speaks of the sons of God seeing the daughters of men and taking them as wives, and of giants upon the earth. Those lines are not trivia. They are a needle pulling a thread through the fabric of time. In the tents of Jared, in the shadowed courtyards of the city, the names Semjaza, Azazel, Shem, Ham, Japheth, Jared, Methuselah, and Lamech were spoken with meaning. Read together, the sequence of names becomes a lament and a promise, a sentence that reads like a warning. Desire untethered births violence, and violence invites judgment. Imagine a carved tablet, the scratch of a stylus scraping clay, the smell of wet earth as a scribe writes the lineage. You can hear the low murmur of men trading rumors, see the glow of fire on weathered faces, taste bread dipped in bitter oil, feel the rough wool of a cloak as elders argue about whether to flee or to stay. How do names become prophecy? How does a generation hear the echo of a decision made by beings not of their kin? These questions push us to read names not as labels, but as directions for destiny. Two worlds collided in that age. On one side were cities of clever hands and loud markets, walls rising stone by stone, bronze hammered into plow and spear, songs of craftsmen and kings. On the other side were altars in hidden groves, the hush of prayers in tents, the small faith of mothers who fed infants while the world praised its own strength. Pride and intimacy faced each other, the sons of Cain, proud. In monument and lineage, carved their names on pillars and boasted of dominion. The sons of Seth, quieter, tried to guard a fragile memory of walking with God. Picture a market at dawn where a drum beats, traders shout prices, the tang of copper in the air. In a nearby lane, a woman prays with salt water on her lips, fingers pressing the grain of a small wooden cross. The clash was not merely of occupation, but of soul. Dialogue in those streets became sharp. A merchant named Hiram might laugh and say to a traveler called Jared, "Why fear the watchers? They bring knowledge." Jared replies, "Knowledge without restraint is a fire in dry wheat." Hiram retorts, "You sound like a slave to fear." Jared answers, "I am a keeper of names." Hiram scoffs, "Names do not feed children." Jared whispers, "But names warn them when to flee." That exchange repeats across tents and palaces 6 to 8 times over, each line a pebble making ripples. The sensory world, dust on the tongue, the clatter of hooves, the cool of a well bucket, the stink of stalls, the warmth of pressed bread, makes the collision immediate and human. Now meet the protagonists through whose eyes this forbidden story sharpens. Enoch walks at the center, not merely as a legend, but as a man whose shadow touched angels and men. Backstory 1, Paragraph 1. Enoch was born into a line of watchers and wanderers, son of Jared, named in a world already fraying. As a boy, he learned to read the stars from his grandfather, to measure time by the way light slid along the hills, to taste the ash of burned offerings and understand the language of smoke. Paragraph 2. His youth was marked by an unease. He noticed how the strong boasted and how the weak were pressed, and he kept a private habit of standing on a ridge at dusk, feeling the air change, listening for a step not his own. Paragraph 3. Those habits widened into a vocation. He entered into conversation with God in a way that made neighbors whisper and scribes copy his words. The record remembers that Enoch walked with God and that the fate of the age seemed to bend around him. Noah is another protagonist whose backstory must be told in 3 parts. Paragraph 1. Noah emerged from a family name that bore both blessing and burden. A man who grew up with hammocks of thought and songs about flood and ark among his people. He learned to shape beams and to trust measures, to listen for seasons in the circling birds. Paragraph 2. As he matured, his heart hardened not into indifference, but into a stubborn hope. He collected small acts of mercy like pebbles, building a theology of care. Feed the hungry, mend the torn, keep the line of faith. Paragraph 3. That coalition of skill and faith would prepare him to be both builder and witness, to receive visions of dawn, destruction, and to obey in ways that horrified the comfortable. A third protagonist, a fictional scribe named Eliam, carries the modern reader's eyes. Paragraph 1. Eliam was a recorder by trade, ink-stained and curious, who loved old scripts and had a habit of asking forbidden questions over clay cups of herb brew. Paragraph 2. He found margins in books where elders had written warnings, notes about the watchers and their names, and he smelled each page like a relic. Paragraph 3. His discovery of a hidden genealogy and a scrap referencing Simjaza and Azazel ignited both fear and a strange hope that history might be read as a warning and a map. These 3 backstories, at about 600 to 800 characters each, give us flesh and motive for the drama that follows. The rise of the Watchers is a crescendo of tension. Imagine an open plain at twilight, the earth warmed by days of sun, the smell of trampled grass and blood, the distant cry of a jackal. The Watchers descend not as light but as weight, their voices a low metallic roll, their faces like cut bronze. A woman, Naama, meets an angel at a river and hears him speak of knowledge. Dialogue unspools between them in 6 exchanges. She asks, "Who are you?" He answers, "We are called by many names, but we are those who watch." She asks, "Why come here?" He answers, "To walk among you is to learn what is hidden." She asks, "What do you ask in return?" He answers, "Only a share in your seed, so that earth and heaven might bind." She cries, "Is that not forbidden?" He replies, "Forbidden is what men say when they fear the cost of wonder." These exchanges repeat in small variations across scenes, each line tasting of oil and copper, each pause echoing with the creak of a tent pole. The mounting tension is not only moral but visceral. The sound of a child's chair tipping over in the dark, the rough palm of a husband covered in clay, the sour bile a father swallows upon seeing a newborn different in stature and stare. This moment must be given 2 to 3 paragraphs of concentrated pressure. The community feels a slow tightening, like binding ropes around a house until the beams groan. There is a public debate as the Nephilim grow in number and in cruelty. Leaders Gazer, Lamech, a loud man with scarred hands, Methuselah, solemn and long-lived, Rahab, a woman who runs a guest house and sees many faces, Shem, a scholar of old rites, and Azazel, a name that returns like a bad scent in conversation. At a council under the fig tree, the dialogue bursts into life with 6 to 8 clear exchanges. Lamech says, They build monuments to themselves. Methuselah answers, monument hides a hollow heart. Rahab asks, what do we do? Shem replies, we preserve what we can. Azazel interrupts, you cannot preserve a fire once it leaps the hearth. Someone cries, is there no law? A voice answers, law without power is a song for the gone. Each line carries a soundscape, the rustle of fig leaves, the distant hammer, the acrid smoke from offerings, the metallic tang of a blade striking flint, the soft sob of a child afraid to sleep. The debate ends in uneasy silence, and the sensory world holds its breath. A revelation comes through Enoch, unusual and prophetic. He walks into a courtyard where women grind grain, where a child bites into sour pomegranate, and the juice drips down his chin. Enoch's voice is low. He reads a warning scraped out in an old tongue, and then speaks with clarity. He proclaims a message that echoes traditions later recorded in Jude. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them, saying that the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment. The citation rings against the stones. The crowd reacts. Some strike their chests and cry for mercy. Others hurl insults and accuse Enoch of fear-mongering. Dialogue stretches into 8 exchanges between Enoch and a skeptical priest named Haran. Haran asks, on what authority do you speak? Enoch answers, on the steps I have taken with God. Haran says, steps cannot be measured. Enoch answers, they can when the footprints are followed by grace. Haran scoffs, grace will not stop men who take wives and tower over law. Enoch replies, grace may not stop, but judgment will follow. Haran demands, who will save us then? Enoch whispers, repentance and shelter for the few who will hear. The soundscape is the rattle of an old door, the faint echo of children playing, the bitter smoke of incense. This is a moment of high stakes and prophetic clarity, and it must compress 500 to 600 characters into its tension, stretched across 2 to 3 tight paragraphs. The story then turns to Methuselah, whose long life becomes an unwilling clock. A scene of birth, the smell of wet wool and new milk, the midwife Hava calling names, the infant's cry like a dawn bell. Methuselah lifts the child to his chest and listens to an old voice prophesy that the child's name marks time until judgment. Dialogue between Methuselah and the elder Raphael goes for 6 exchanges. Methuselah asks, will his name delay the weekend of wrath? Raphael answers, names carry seeds. Methuselah says, then plant we must. Raphael replies, plant mercy and iron. Methuselah asks, how do we till what is not ours? Raphael answers, by remembering the covenant. The sensory field is thick, the sweet taste of date syrup, the humid press of a child on a shoulder, the groan of a house settling, the metallic scent of a tool left by the door. The clock of Methuselah's years becomes not a boast but a timer, and every laugh in his household feels like a beat toward an inevitable bell. As the years fold, Noah's calling intensifies. He hears storms. In the quiet, a sea of distant wings, the premonitory crack of wood where beams will one day meet. He speaks with his wife Naamah in scenes of domestic whisper, exchanges of 7 to 8 lines that reveal fear turned into obedience. She says, build what? He answers, an ark. She cries, they will laugh. He answers, let them. She asks, will God save us? He answers, God will save a remnant. You can taste the salt on his lips from tears, feel the heft of a hammer, smell the resin used to seal wood, hear the creak of timbers as they rise. The tension here is thick and close, drawn over 500 to 600 characters, in short bursts of action and speech, a pressure that finally cracks the complacency of many who watch and flee, or who stubbornly remain. The act of God taking back what had been trespassed upon arrives as a climactic scene with the language of translation and of removal. Enoch's translation is a doorway for the imagination. Hebrews 11:5 is remembered. By faith, Enoch was translated so that he should not see death. The narrative voice softens into awe. Describe the moment. Light like unnumbered lamps filling a field, the smell of crushed cedar, the low hum of a choir not of this earth, the sensation of gravity loosening, the solid warmth of a hand vanishing like a candle. Dialogue is small here but precise. Enoch says, "I have seen the council." A neighbor asks, "Will we be left?" Enoch answers, "Many will be left, but mercy moves like a hand." The comparison with Elijah and with the Promised One in Jesus Christ is made with reverent care, asking, are these signs pointing toward a fuller taking, a final gathering? The question hangs, and the audience is asked to consider whether translation can be a pattern and whether such intervention still breathes into time. The consequence is moral and generational. The Nephilim leave a scar across families. Children inherit fear, songs change, alliances form or break. The narrative places at least 5 secondary characters in action: Jared, whose secret letters circulate; Lamech, who raises his hand in defense; Methuselah, who keeps time; Rahab, who shelters strangers; Azazel, who teaches metalwork that corrupts. Each name performs a visible act. Jared writes, Lamech argues, Methuselah grimes at the counting of years. Rahab tends a wounded traveler named Shem. Azazel melts bronze and whispers shortcuts that become weapons. These acts are sensory: the smell of heated metal, the sting of a child's tears, the calloused palm on a plow, the rustle of a manuscript. There are scenes where these characters speak in extended dialogue groups of 6 to 8 exchanges, where the texture of their choices is apparent, and where the reader feels the moral weight in the sound of a door closing or a child's laugh. What does this forbidden story mean for us? The application lands hard and personal. The Nephilim are not only ancient giants. They are a type of any-time heaven and earth cross without God's guardrails, when power seduces and law grows lax. To walk with God, to cultivate intimacy, is to resist the cultural temptation to elevate knowledge without holiness. The text asks 2 concrete practices. Reserve 10 minutes at dawn for unhurried prayer, and name 1 small act of mercy you will do this week, and write it down so it becomes a remnant for your children. If you are moved by this message and want to walk with a community that studies such histories and how they point to Jesus Christ and to the coming hope, subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who finds life in the strange and holy margins of Scripture. And in the comments below, write simply, I believe. 1 month later, the valley had a different rhythm. The scribe Eliam returned to his tent to find that the manuscript he had copied had been discussed in 3 households. The house of Rahab, where refugees found rest; the shop of Hiram, where metalwork was tempered by new conscience; and the tent of Lamech, where a son named Jotham had refused to march with bandits after hearing the warning. Names were repeated in small prayers at wells. People gathered at dawn in groups of 4 or 5 to whisper a short plea before labor, and a kind of watchfulness settled over the neighborhood. Methuselah, aged and slow, walked more deliberately to market, and when he passed the workshop of Azazel, he noticed fewer knives with thick edges. There were still those who scoffed and said the old stories were for fools. But Naamah told her neighbors that she had sewn an extra blanket and given it to a pregnant woman who had nothing. That act spread like a quiet rumor. The community journal recorded 7 small mercy acts and 3 reconciliations between families who had been at odds. The scribe Eliam wrote a letter to a distant cousin named Shem, urging him to listen and to teach children the old songs in new light. The changes were not sweeping, but they were real. A small warmth moving through a cold place. 3 months in, the pattern deepened. A local assembly in the town square counted the names of those who had given and those who had hardened. They found that a small core of 30 families had adopted an intentional practice of prayer and mercy. Noah's descendants began to teach building skills for shelter, not for pride, but for refuge. Rahab opened a kitchen 3 times a week for travelers, and Lamech's son apprenticed under a craftsman who refused to make weapons for raiders. The scribe Eliam traveled to neighboring villages carrying his copies of marginal notes, and met elders named Hazael and Miriam who confirmed similar shifts in their places. A scholar from the south named Jadon read Enoch's words aloud in a courtyard, and 60 people listened until the stars came out. There were also pushbacks. Azazel and his followers sharpened words into slanders and accused the faithful of cowardice. The town council debated exile for the preachers. Yet the record showed 93 small acts of mercy, 14 reconciliations, and 2 public acknowledgments of wrongdoing by men who had profited from chaos. 6 months later, the legacy had begun to shape not only private houses but laws. A new market regulation forbade the trade in certain weapons and enforced protections for women traveling alone. A midwife named Hava, who had once feared for her livelihood, now walked openly with a band of helpers and taught midwifery to 3 young women, one of whom, named Selah, would later become a leader of a shelter. The scribe Eliam's copies had multiplied. A school run by Shem accepted a small tuition and used it to buy grain for the poor. Methuselah, who had watched generations like seasons, declared in a public statement that he would plant a grove in memory of those who had chosen mercy over power. 5 names appeared in the communal ledger as patrons of that grove: Methuselah, Rahab, Noah, Eliam, and Selah. The community recorded 3 marriages that bridged feuds and 4 apprenticeships that replaced warcraft with civil skill. The overall change was modest but structural, like stones placed to guide the flow of a stream. The people began to believe that names could be reclaimed from the sentence of past violence and made into markers of mercy. In closing, the forbidden story of the Nephilim is not meant to baffle us with sensational detail, but to call us back to choices. It asks whether we will give our children songs of fear or of faith, whether our names will be part of a sentence that curses or a sentence that redeems. Tomorrow morning, choose 10 minutes of silence and write one name you are willing to bear differently in your family. Reach out to one neighbor with practical help and write about it so others can be encouraged. If this narrative touched you, subscribe and share, and comment below with "I believe" if you choose to walk closer to the God who warns and rescues. Remember, the same God who intervened in that ancient age still calls people today to live with holiness, mercy, and courage. May your name be a sentence of hope for the generations to come.